So the objectives of this presentation is to outline the history of the use of the antenatal steroids. We need to review the evidence base to support the use of antenatal steroids in the different gestational age groups. We'll review in detail some of the recent evidence that has come up regarding the use of steroids, especially regarding the use in the 34 to 36 weekers. There is also some recent evidence that has come up for the extreme preterms for babies under 24 weeks, as well as the long-term effect of the repeated courses of antenatal steroids that was used in the Australian study by Crowther et al. We will try to summarize the approach to use of antenatal steroids in each age group. So these are points that all of us are familiar, that 10% of the babies are born premature, and obviously the extreme premature or the babies who are under the 29, 20, 30 weeks of gestation are going to have more of the respiratory distress syndrome. It still continues to be a major source of morbidity and mortality, and antenatal steroids have been proven to reduce the risk and severity as well as to improve the outcome. So how did this discovery happen? It was a serendipitous discovery when Professor Liggins, who was an obstetrician, so he was studying pregnant sheep, eaves, and he noted that the lambs which were born to these pregnant eaves who received the steroid had lower respiratory distress. So this observation led to him collaborating with Dr. Hovey, who is a neonatologist in New Zealand, who was his colleague, and they published the study in 1972, which demonstrated a reduction in the incidence of RDS as well as the mortality. So their study, 282 women at risk of premature delivery were randomly assigned to receive either the standard treatment or standard treatment plus 2 doses of steroid. And the early neonatal death was 14% in the control group and just 3% in the steroid group. 24% of the controls had respiratory distress syndrome, but only 4% of those given steroids had respiratory distress syndrome. So this is Dr. Liggins in the view, and in the next picture he is standing with Dr. Hovey. And it would be of great interest to you to know that this antenatal steroid studies, the meta-analysis which was done was the basis for the Cochrane collaboration getting the impetus and the impetus we have for evidence-based medicine as a whole. So this is the symbol that is used by the Cochrane analysis, and this is nothing but the forest plot for the use of steroids from 1972 to 1991, and obviously the risk was reduced by 30 to 50%. And the most difficult part to understand was that even though the study was available in 1972, it took the world about 19 to 20 years to accept such a significant finding. How do steroids act? I mean, there are multiple mechanisms of action. The most important is increasing the surfactant production. There is also a local effect by increasing the release of the surfactant that's already produced and stored in the lamellar bodies. It can accelerate the development of the type 1 and type 2 pneumocystis and upregulate the epithelial sodium channel. So this membrane stabilizing function could be one of the reasons why it helps in conditions like necrotizing enterocolitis and other factors. And we have multiple effects inducing the fetal lung antioxidant system as well. Gene function is improved as well. So we have a strong evidence base. I'll skip through these slides because all of you may be familiar with the evidence base we have. So almost every aspect of steroid use has been studied, and there are multiple Cochrane analysis looking at these topics. The most important, of course, is the one looking at corticosteroid benefit in preterm babies. So in the 2006 systematic review, the randomized control trial compared antenatal steroid versus placebo. Was a significant reduction of respiratory distress syndrome. The reduction was quite significant with a relative risk of 0.66. Moderate to severe RDS was also reduced, and in addition, we found improvement in multiple factors: intraventricular hemorrhage, necrotizing enterocolitis. Neonatal mortality was also affected because of these outcomes reducing, and infection in the first 48 hours was reduced, probably because of the sicker babies improving faster or being less sick. So these are the relative risks for all these. And in addition to the stable baby, if the respiratory distress syndrome is not very severe, the baby is more stable clinically, so you might expect less intraventricular hemorrhage and so on. But in addition, the steroids have effects on the gut maturity, in the brain as well, the membrane stabilization effect helps. So the recommendation is in a woman at risk of early preterm imminent birth, use a single course of antenatal corticosteroids when the maturity is 34 weeks and less, when the premature birth is planned or expected within the next 7 days, even if birth is likely within the 24 hours. The effect of steroids starts within the first few hours due to the release of the surfactant, which is already stored in the lungs. So we don't need to wait. So regardless of the reason the woman is considered at risk of preterm, we may consider giving the steroids even if she is likely to deliver in the next few hours, because we can't predict that. But the more time we get, the better. The typical effect is more between the 24 to 48 hours, and up to 7 days we may find a benefit, though the effect reduces with time. And before 31 weeks, 1 case of RDS is prevented for every 5 women treated. So this is a very significant effect. So as I said, the optimal time is to administer the steroids when preterm birth is planned or expected within the next 48 hours, and benefits are shown from 24 hours to 7 days. No typical effect is seen under 24 hours when you see at respiratory distress as an outcome, but mortality effect is seen. When we discuss the extreme premature also, we will notice that there is no effect on respiratory distress as an outcome because almost all of them have, but mortality reduction is seen in that group as well. So where appropriate, we should monitor for signs of puerperal sepsis when steroids have been given. This is because of the effect of the steroids on the maternal immune system. So this is again repeating the same thing that we have preterm delivery, we should start a course even if only 1 dose is anticipated. Where there is no risk like maternal chorea amnionitis, we should start tocolytic drugs to try and buy time for the steroids to act. But the risk benefit should be considered, and if there is a risk to the mother's health or the baby's health, if there is infection, for example, the cytokine storm may affect the baby more, so we should deliver the baby early. And where appropriate, we should estimate the risk of preterm birth by considering the use of adjunct prediction tests. So this comes into play when we consider the number of times you give steroids and the mother doesn't deliver. About 40% of the time we give the steroids, but the mother doesn't deliver within the next week. So it's a wasted course of steroid, so to speak. And because of the concern about future steroid doses or further steroid doses, we should try to confirm as best as we can. Of course, it's not clear cut, and the obstetricians will vouch that it's very difficult to be very sure about this, but measures like fibronectin measurement and assessment of the cervical length could help. So between the 2 drugs that are routinely used, is there any difference? So betamethasone and dexamethasone are the commonly used drugs, and availability is one of the determinants as well. So because not all places have dexamethasone injection. Betamethasone by pharmacokinetics, we have to give it at 24-hour intervals, but some units use an accelerated course. Even betamethasone is given 12 hours apart in order to complete the schedule in time, and the results are comparable to the 2 doses at 24 hours. But the side effects may be more if you give 2 doses in 12-hour interval for betamethasone. In case of dexamethasone, because of the half-life, we have to give it 12 hours apart, and it is 6 milligram doses. So why do we prefer these medicines instead of prednisolone or other medicines? So these steroids are less extensively metabolized by the placental enzyme, which is 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 2. The efficacy of the alternative dosing regime is not proven yet. So comparing the studies of betamethasone and dexamethasone, there is no clear-cut difference. There are studies which show less PVL and better long-term outcome with betamethasone. However, there are other studies which show pulmonary outcome as well as lower IVH rate with dexamethasone. The Cochrane review concludes that there is no significant difference between the two, so it might boil down to availability. Both are luckily not expensive medicines. But we should be aware of the tragedy with betamethasone sulfite preparation being used in some babies in the early 2000s. So we should be careful. Of course, I think everyone is aware, and this product may not be available for maternal use, but we should be avoiding the sulfite preparation as it might be neurotoxic for the developing brain. So if the mother has significant infection, for example, tuberculosis, which can flare up with steroid use, we should be careful. Don't delay the delivery if chorioamnionitis is present. It can be safely used with prolonged premature rupture of membranes, and with multiple pregnancies, even though possibly the distribution is different and the effect on the babies may be lower, we still use it in the same protocol. However, there is no role for electively repeating the steroid courses in multiple pregnancy, anticipating preterm delivery. It can be used in pregnancy-induced hypertension as well as in maternal hypertension, but because these are having minimal mineralocorticoid effect, it doesn't affect the maternal blood pressure much. It can be used with caution in maternal diabetes, and we have to monitor the sugar closely. Are there any side effects? Obviously, reduced fetal movement and reduced biophysical profile score is an effect that all obstetricians are aware, and we shouldn't intervene unless there is any other clear sign that the fetal distress is significant. Same way, the fetal heart rate variability may be affected, and these changes are little more with betamethasone than with dexamethasone. Concern with immune suppression, obviously, if there is signs of chorioamnionitis, you don't try to delay the labor. There is no significant effect on blood pressure because of the minimal mineralocorticoid activity. And we have to monitor the mother for risk of hyperglycemia from the steroids where there is gestational diabetes. So what is the recommendation in the threshold of viability? So it's not recommended under 23 weeks gestation, and use at 23 to 23 plus 6 weeks could be considered where there is a significant risk of delivering in the next 7 days. To some extent, this depends on what the parents want in terms of the extent of resuscitation. In UAE, of course, it's already a gray zone with what to do with resuscitation in this extreme preterm babies. Most of the obstetricians do not electively give the steroid at 23 weeks, but if it looks like they will prolong the pregnancy, when they approach close to 24 weeks, they may start giving. So in the 24 to 26 week group, there is limited evidence because of the numbers, but there is clear evidence that the mortality is reduced. Statistically, the different incidence of respiratory distress is difficult to show because of the very high incidence of respiratory distress in either group. So even if there is RDS, it tends to be less severe, and so the mortality is reduced. Recently, there is a study published by Kim et al. From South Korea where they have looked at the use of steroids at 22 and 23 weeks of gestation. They had a good number. About 50% of the babies were not considered for the steroid. About 30 babies received 2 doses, and about 20 babies received 1 dose. And they clearly showed that even a single dose had a significant improvement in mortality in these babies. And it is related to the multiple effects of the steroid that we displayed in the beginning. So that study is in open access domain, and I would recommend you to go through it. It's Kim et al. From South Korea. In the terms of the repeat courses, this is an intriguing topic. When I was doing my DM, this was one of the common issues that kept coming up, because at those times, many people were doing similar to the bronchopulmonary dysplasia, where we were using steroids very commonly. The mothers were also given, if antenatal steroids helped, we should be able to give it on a repeated basis. So people followed very different regimes. They used to give even weekly courses of steroid where you had PAH in the mother, or if you had multiple pregnancies. However, it's clear that it's not safe totally. We'll discuss that in the coming slides. So the recommendation is to use repeated antenatal steroids in women at risk of early preterm imminent birth following a single course when the gestational age is still 32 weeks and below, when preterm birth is definitely expected in the next 2 days to 7 days. It's not less than 7 days following a single course of the previous antenatal steroid. The clinical decision to use a preterm repeat dose should be based on the assessment of ongoing risk. So the guidelines are different depending on whether you follow the RCOG, the Royal College UK guidelines, which say that you only consider it if initial course was given under 26 weeks of gestation and there is impending preterm delivery. The ACOG recommendation shows a single repeat course of antenatal steroids at less than 34 weeks with impending preterm birth, and prior course was admitted more than 14 days previously. Sorry for this, I think something is coming up on the screen. These scratches. Okay, not sure what happened to the slides, but some design has come up on them. So in terms of repeat course, we could either give a course or a single dose. So I mean, even a single dose may be effective where we decide to give. So where we give multiple courses of steroid therapy, we may have small for gestational, the risk of giving multiple doses, baby may be small for gestational age, reduced head circumference may be there, smaller placenta, and even the risk of cerebral palsy was queried. But in this case, we have to look at the studies by Crowther et al. In the ACT-RDS, the Australian study, collaborative study, and they have published the long-term follow-up of the repeat course of steroids. They have clearly shown that there is no significant difference in the neurodevelopment between the babies who received a single course versus multiple course. So from that point of view, in the 2016 publication, they have clearly said that. So we have reasonable evidence when these children grow up about 10 years of age, it's safe enough to consider repeat courses. So we should be cautious, but at the same time, we don't need to totally avoid. If it is more than 2 weeks, I think the American Academy guideline is more realistic. Single repeat course at less than 34 weeks, if more than 2 weeks from the previous dose. So the benefit, obviously, the reduced RDS and the reduced composite infant morbidity is seen. And so the suggested approach is to avoid routine use based on gestation cutoff, avoid prophylactic antenatal steroid in the first place, unless there is evidence of risk of preterm labor. So you're trying to avoid usage of this unnecessarily in the first place. Careful diagnosis of preterm labor. So as far as possible, try to avoid overuse. So the first course itself, you're more likely to deliver the baby. And parents should be informed if you do decide about a repeat course or dose, that we should say there is lack of adequate evidence, but with the current evidence, I think we are a little more comfortable. A quick run through of the ALP study, which is looking at usage in the 34 to 36 weeks group. So this study was by Gyamfi, Bannerman et al, and it was published in NEJM in 2016. So the recommendation before that was not extended to 34 weeks and above because of lack of data. There was also concern that above 34 weeks, the brain development, the synapse formation, the rapid dendritic development is at a rapid phase. So they would suggest that not to use. But it is clear that the infants who are born in the late preterm period also have complications like respiratory distress, which necessitate longer stay in NICU. So this was a randomized study to assess whether the administration of betamethasone to women who are likely to deliver in the late preterm period would reduce respiratory and other neonatal complications. So the population was 34 to 36 weeks gestation with high probability being predicted by presentation with preterm labor with intact membranes and at least 3 centimeter dilatation or 75% cervical effacement. So this is after they have been examined. If there is spontaneous rupture of membrane and expected preterm delivery for any other indication, either through induction or cesarean in the next 7 days. She would be ineligible if she had received antenatal steroids and she was expected to deliver less than 12 hours for any reason. The primary outcome they looked at was the need for respiratory support within 72 hours after birth, consisting of one or more of the following: CPAP or high flow nasal cannula for at least 2 consecutive hours, supplemental oxygen with a fraction of FiO2 more than 0.3 for at least 4 hours, and of course the severely sick babies needing ventilation or ECMO. And out of the 24,000 women who underwent screening, about 2,800 were eligible and 1,400 odd were assigned to the betamethasone group and 1,400 to the placebo group. And the findings were similar at the baseline except for maternal age and ethnic background. The 860 women in the betamethasone group and 826 in the placebo group received both doses. Of the 1145 women who did not receive a second dose, it was mainly because majority delivered within the 24 hours. So that is not unexpected in the clinical practice that they go on to deliver fast. The primary outcome was lower in the betamethasone group than in the placebo group. The number needed to treat was 35. However, there was a slightly increased risk of hypoglycemia in the betamethasone group, but there is no impact on the outcome. And it's not clear why this is the case, but it's something to monitor if you do use in this group. All the disorders were reduced. Mainly the impact was on transient tachypnea as well as the composite of respiratory distress syndrome and TTN. The need for resuscitation at birth was also reduced because sometimes these babies need resuscitation because the lung is a bit stiff, and when with the steroid use the lung is not as stiff, they don't need as much resuscitation. Surfactant use was about halved even though the rate was not very high to start with. It was 3% versus 1.8%. So they concluded that administration of antenatal betamethasone in women at risk of late preterm delivery significantly reduced the rate of respiratory complications in the newborn. So the ACOG changed their practice recommendations to include this group, and there is a differential approach. The maternal fetal medicine specialist group, which is one of the key group behind the study, changed it exactly as per the study protocol. The ACOG, the American Academy, suggested administering betamethasone at 34 to 36 weeks in women with imminent risk within 7 days. Chorioamnionitis is a contraindication. Any previous steroid use is a contraindication, and they don't recommend tocolysis for this group. And the RCOG has given an option to consider in babies between 34 to 36 weeks, and even in term elective cesarean, there is an option to consider. So what is the evidence in term elective cesarean? So we have a study by Stuckfield et al. In 2005, studying in 10 maternity units in England and Wales. They gave 2 doses of betamethasone 24-hour intervals, and 940 babies were available for analysis. There was a reduced rate of TTN, which was halved from 4% to 2%, reduced need for respiratory support and NICU admission. There was a greater effect at 37 to 38 weeks. So the reasons for admission, you can see that RDS by different severity is reduced in the betamethasone group on the left, and transient tachypnea reduced 10 on one side and 19 on the other side, and number of admissions to the NICU reduced as well. And you can see here that the gestation at which you use it has a link to the benefit. So at 37 weeks, you can see there was a 6% to 12% difference. And at 38 weeks, it reduces to 8% and 4%. And at 39 weeks, the difference is even narrower. So the closer you get to 39 weeks, the lesser the effect. So if you are delivering at 37 or 38 weeks, you are more likely to see a benefit. So for elective cesarean at term, where possible, plan at 39 weeks or above. So that is important from the obstetrician point of view. It makes a difference for the baby's feeding. It makes a difference for the baby's jaundice levels, and it makes a difference for the need for NICU admission due to RDS as well. However, if you do need to consider delivery before that gestation, you use antenatal steroids 48 hours prior to the planned cesarean if there is a known fetal lung immaturity or increased risk. So this group is still not clear cut whether you should recommend or not, and it depends on individual practice. So the number needed to treat for the 34 to 36 weeks, we saw that it was 35, 1 in 35, but for the term babies, it's 1 in 71. And probably the number is better in the 37 or 38 week groups. So this is the forest plot which looks at the distribution of between 34 weeks and 39 weeks. And you can see that in terms of respiratory distress syndrome as a whole, there is an improvement. The shift is significantly to the left. And transient tachypnea of newborn as well, you can see that there is a definite benefit. So this included multiple studies which have been published for this group. And in terms of severe respiratory distress syndrome as well, you see a benefit. Even though the studies are not clear-cut showing differences, the diamond is obviously to the left. Finally, we have to look at quality improvement. So this is one area which makes a huge difference to the outcome of the preterm baby. So each obstetric team and possibly the neonatal team should be involved in that as well. Should have a preterm labor toolkit. We should have timely medication availability in the labor room so there is no delay in administration. Policy to administer dose before transfer in case of in utero transfer in preterm labor is important. And appropriate documentation of the first and second dose should be done. And even in the neonatal notes, we should make sure that we clearly write the steroid usage in the notes. Good collaboration and regular discussion between the obstetric and neonatal team is important as well. So avoiding overuse is a consideration. As I said, only 20 to 40% receiving the steroids deliver within 7 days of the course. And different tools are available, fibronectin, cervical length measurement, to predict the preterm labor effectively. So monitoring this is going to be helpful to improve it. So to summarize, antenatal steroid use has been an intervention of great importance. There is greatly improved outcomes thanks to a very effective treatment. And many people vouch that the antenatal steroid has been the single most important finding which has made a difference to the life of the premature babies. The usage varies, but most of the units use 90 to 95% these days, and the only reasons they don't get it is because of coming and delivering very suddenly, or the mother being in a critically unwell condition where you need to deliver quickly. Clear knowledge of the use and limitations is important to all obstetricians and neonatologists. With this, I think we can take questions.